Hello, sorry, I've just been told my mic was on mute, so I think now everyone should be able to hear me. Yep, so good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Covenant of Mayors webinar on financing energy efficiency. We'll be listening today to a presentation by Sébastien Reland from the Council of Europe Development Bank. He will tell us a bit more about the ELENA-CEB technical assistance. The main idea of these webinars is for us, the Covenant of Mayors, to give a series of webinars organized for the signatories, the coordinators, and the supporters of the Covenant of Mayors on the theme of financing. And we hope that this will inspire you to develop and implement your sustainable energy action plans and also give you ideas of how you can finance them through different funds. So I hope this morning the webinar will go on for about 1 hour depending on the questions that we have. In terms of the instructions, I draw your attention to the chat box, which you see at your bottom right-hand corner. This chat box should only be used for two purposes. The first one is to signal a problem that you have to us. For example, you've lost the sound, you no longer hear us, or that we are speaking too fast. The second purpose of this chat box is for you, the participants, to type your questions that you may have to our speaker, because you will notice that you do not have the permissions or the rights to speak during this webinar. So we'd like to ask you to please type your question in the chat box, and then we at the Covenant of Mayors office will read this question out at the end of the presentation and give the opportunity for Sébastien to answer these questions. In terms of webcam, at the moment you should see me from the Covenant of Mayors and Sébastien. No other persons have the possibility to show their webcams, so during the presentation we should not be interrupted. I think that's all from our side, from the Covenant of Mayors side. I hope that you enjoy this webinar, and I will now give the floor to our first speaker and only speaker, Sébastien Reland. You can now upload your presentation. Thanks a lot.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sebastian Reland. I'm head of donor relations and fiduciary accounts at the Council of Europe Development Bank, which is also known as CB. I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar today. I really appreciate the interest that you have in CB ELENA, and I'd also like to thank the Covenant of Mayors for hosting this webinar. I know that we all have very busy schedules, so I'll go right into the presentation. The presentation is structured very simply. I'll say a few words about CB first, also because it's important for you to understand how CB works because it has an impact on CB ELENA. And then I'll go directly into the presentation of CB ELENA. I'll try to be as brief as possible, leaving as much time for Q&A afterwards. So let's start with CB. CB is a social development bank. Its parent institution is the Council of Europe, which is a European institution based in Strasbourg, in France, whose mandate is to promote democracy and human rights in Europe. So the Council of Europe Development Bank, also known as CB, is the financial arm of the Council of Europe, much like the EIB is the financial arm of the European Union. The mandate of the CB is to strengthen social cohesion in Europe by providing loans for infrastructure projects in the social sector. The bank has 40 European states as shareholders. Its footprint is wider than the EU, as you can see from the number of states, 25 out of the 27 EU member states are members of the bank. The only ones that are not members are the UK and Austria. But the footprint of CEB extends to the west, you have Iceland, to the east, you have Georgia and Moldova, and to the south, you have Turkey. So it's a wider footprint than the EU. The bank provides loans to its member states and operates and actually provide loans currently to 34 of its 40 member states. So it can provide loans in all of its member states, but it focuses mostly on its member states that are located in Central, South, and Eastern Europe, because this is where obviously the needs in terms of social infrastructure are the greatest. Just to give you an idea in terms of volume of what we do, we're very much a boutique operation. We have around 200 staff, and our volumes in 2012, we approved 1.8 billion euros in loans, and our outstanding at the end of the year was around 12 billion euros. We're very much a project-driven institution. What I mean by that is that we provide loans for investment projects, which means that, for example, we do not provide loans for budgets of our member states. We usually finance up to 50% of the project cost, and we have competitive pricing terms thanks to our AAA or AA plus rating. So we are able to borrow cheaply money on the markets, and we on-lend that money with favorable conditions to our borrowers. And our borrowers are either our member states directly at the national level, or we also provide loans to sub-sovereign public entities such as municipalities or regional authorities. Finally, we also provide loans to public and private banks who will then on-lend these funds to final beneficiaries such as municipalities or SMEs. We do that because we're a small institution and it's a way for us to reach small beneficiaries which we couldn't reach directly because we have limited resources in terms of manpower. So working in partnership with banks allows us to reach SMEs or small municipalities. We provide loans in 3 sectors that are linked to our social mandate. The first one is we provide loans for strengthening social integration. So we will fund, for example, projects that provide aid to migrants, such as housing for migrants, or social housing, or projects that deal with urban renewal. Or again, we will provide loans, as I mentioned, through banks to help job creation in small and medium enterprises. The second line of our work relates to the environment. We will provide loans, for example, that are linked to reconstruction of housing after earthquakes or floods. Also loans for wastewater treatment plants or funding for cultural heritage, such as renovation of cultural heritage sites. Finally, we provide loans to support public infrastructure with a social vocation. So the kind of projects that we can finance here are the construction or renovation of schools, hospitals, administrative and judicial services. For example, prisons. I know this may not sound very social, but actually it is. We do quite a bit of financing of prisons in Eastern Europe according to European Union standards, and that's a big improvement to the existing infrastructure. And we can also finance fire or police stations. We have a solid track record in energy efficiency funding. Obviously, the lines of interventions that I mentioned are vertical, and among that, we can do a lot in terms of funding of energy. So, for example, when we fund social housing, typically we also can fund um, thermal improvement of social housing to increase the energy efficiency. Since 2000, we have funded about 1.5 billion euros in loans for energy efficiency. And that includes um, anything from improvement, as I said, of energy efficiency in social housing, but it can also be district heating networks or a local transport. For example, when we finance a tram or a new line of buses, which helps improve energy efficiency at the city level. And when you just look at what we've done in terms of housing, improving the energy efficiency of housing, we've funded, or at least part funded, 246,000 units in terms of renovation. Just to give you one example of the type of project that we finance, we did in 2010 a project in Belgium. We provided a loan to SWL, la Société Wallonne de Logement, which is a major social housing operator in Belgium. And it was a 125 million euro loan for the part financing of the thermal renovation of its housing park. So 80,000 dwellings. It was a big project, 1.2 billion euros. And the aim here of this thermal renovation of housing, social housing, was to decrease the annual energy consumption of heating oil equivalent from 30 to 9 liters per square meter. So through this type of project, we're mixing basically our energy efficiency aim with our social mandate. By providing loan for a social housing operator, we're also helping fight energy poverty in Europe. I'm having trouble with sorry about this, but I'm having trouble with let me try this. Yes. Now let's go to CB ELENA, which is the main subject of this presentation. CB ELENA is a facility which provides grants to fund technical assistance for sustainable energy projects. The purpose of this facility is to help public authorities who want to carry out energy efficiency or renewable energy projects in favor of disadvantaged populations. Those public authorities may have the will to carry out these sustainable energy projects, but they don't necessarily have the institutional capacity or the technical capacity to carry out these projects. And that's where CB ELENA comes in. CB ELENA provides grants which will finance technical assistance to provide the capacity that public authorities need to carry out these projects. CB ELENA is funded by the EU through the Intelligent Energy Europe program. It was endowed with 5 million euros, and the contracting of the technical assistance can be done until the end of 2014. And the duration of the technical assistance that is provided is 3 years maximum from the date of the signing of the contribution agreement between the CB and the beneficiary. So who are these beneficiaries? Who can benefit from this CB ELENA facility? Well, it's public authorities, whether at a national level, at a regional level, or at a local level, or other public bodies that are basically related to public authorities. The other thing is that these To benefit from a CB ELENA grant, a public authority has to be located in a country that is both a member of CB and of the Intelligent Energy Europe 2 program, which funds CB ELENA. And so currently, there are 30 countries in which public authorities can benefit from the CB ELENA facilities. It's all the countries that are both member states of the EU and of CB. So that's basically all EU member states except Austria and the UK because they're not members of CB. Then there's also Croatia, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. In a way, in a bit like we do for our loans, the grants can be provided either directly by the CB, directly to the public authority, or we can also work with finance institutions, basically public or private banks, to whom in this case we provide the technical assistance, and they are in charge of providing themselves the technical assistance to the final beneficiaries, which are public authorities, as part of a wider financing program. So let's say that we have a bank which wants to do a financing program targeting public authorities for energy efficiency projects. They can come to us, request a CB ELENA grant, and use that CB ELENA grant to provide technical assistance to the public authorities to which they also provide the loans. So it's like an integrated approach where they will provide a loan plus technical assistance. I should also mention that the projects can be implemented either directly by the public authorities or through third parties, such as ESCOs or concession holders. So there is a degree of flexibility in how the projects can be implemented. In terms of eligible investments, what kind of projects, investment projects, can benefit from a CB ELENA grant? Well, it's all about increasing energy efficiency and integrating renewable energy. So this can be done in particular in housing, whether it's low-income housing, housing for refugees, migrants, and displaced persons. It can also be done in public service infrastructure, whether it's hospitals, nursing homes, schools, universities, training centers, prisons, fire police stations, municipal, local, regional administration buildings. So you can see here there's a wide scope of buildings which can benefit from CB ELENA grants for improving energy efficiency and integrating renewable energy. And what we mean by that is, for example, a grant can be used to replace the windows or improve the thermal isolation of the roof or the facade of a building. It can also be used to replace the heating system, whether within the building or within at the district level, for example, by putting in place a district heating network. It can also be efficient lighting or efficient system to air conditioning, air conditioning. And again, same thing for the public service infrastructure. So the other type of eligible investments which can benefit from CB ELENA, again to increase energy efficiency or integrate renewable energy, are public local transport infrastructure, whether it's buses, trams, trolleybuses, or metro, or again, public utilities infrastructure, such as the treatment of solid and liquid waste, as well as wastewater. So typically, what you can see from these two slides is that the CB ELENA grant can go to the type of projects that are financed by CB. And they will serve, the CB ELENA grants will serve to increase energy efficiency, as I mentioned, thermal renovation, or integrating renewable energy. So for example, if you have a building, you could have PV panels or solar collectors on the top of the building. One thing that it cannot finance is standalone renewable energy plants. It has to be tied to either a building, and usually a public building, or to public local transport infrastructure or public utilities infrastructure. But I think even with that restriction, there's a wide type of investment projects that can benefit from a CB ELENA grant. In terms of eligible expenses, we've mentioned who can benefit from the CB ELENA grant, what type of projects can benefit. Now let's see what kind of expenditures are eligible to be financed by a CB ELENA grant. Very simply put, it has to be expenditures related to the advanced preparation and or implementation of the project. So for example, in terms of technical expenditures or technical related service, it can be feasibility studies and energy audits. So for the financial side of the project, it can be anything related to the preparation of business plans or market surveys to see whether there's a demand for an investment project. The CB ELENA grant can also be used to finance the preparation of call for tenders and contracts, so anything that is related to procurement. It can also be used, so obviously what I've mentioned here is services that you would purchase through consultancy services. But CB ELENA grants can also be used to fund additional staff which will be hired by the beneficiary. So for example, if a beneficiary wants to set up a project implementation unit to prepare and carry out a project, it can use the CB ELENA grant to hire these staff and pay for them. What you cannot use CB ELENA grants is to pay for existing staff. It has to be either consultancy services for all the type of expenditures that I just mentioned, or new staff that you will hire in relation to the energy efficiency or renewable energy projects that you want to carry out. What is excluded in terms of expenditures are pre-feasibility studies. The logic here is that the Commission is ready to finance, or should I say the European Union is ready to finance this CB ELENA facility, but it wants to see results, which is why you cannot use it to finance pre-feasibility studies, because pre-feasibility studies might not result in a project in the end. You can also not use the CB ELENA grants to finance hardware investments. It really has to be, it's only for technical assistance. Finally, I should tell you that there is a ceiling to how much the CB ELENA grant can be used. It has to be, the CB ELENA grant can finance up to 90% of the eligible cost, which means that if a project sponsor comes up with a project and sees that he will need €1 million in technical assistance, CB ELENA can only finance up to 90%, which is already a substantial amount. So in this case, €900,000. And that's about it in terms of eligible expenses. I should also mention that there are two ways in which CB can provide a CB ELENA grant. Either we provide the technical assistance ourselves, so in which case we contract with a technical assistance provider to provide it to the beneficiary of the CB ELENA grant, or the CB ELENA, we provide the funds to the CB ELENA beneficiary, and the CB ELENA beneficiary, in this case, for example, a public authority, a national public authority, would hire the consultants or the additional staff itself. Another important aspect of this CB ELENA facility is the minimum leverage ratio. Here again, the logic is very simple. The Commission is willing to fund this CB ELENA facilities to help kickstart energy efficiency or renewable energy projects, but it also wants to see results on the ground, which is why the Commission has set up this minimum leverage ratio, which is that the investment cost of the projects must be at least 20 times the CB ELENA grant. So to put it very simply, if a CB ELENA grant is of €1 million in terms of, to fund the technical assistance, well, the project cost has to be at least 20 million euros. And the basis to calculate that ratio is pretty simple. It's the costs that have been committed over the duration of the technical assistance, which, as I mentioned earlier, is 3 years. So at the end of a 3-year period, after the 3-year, after which we've signed the contribution agreement, we will look at all the costs that have been committed. And what we mean by committed is the costs that have been paid by the beneficiaries, or the costs that have been contracted through the signing of a contract, or for which the beneficiary has put in place a call for tender. And we sum up that amount, and that amount of all the cost has to be at least 20 times the cost of or the amount of the CB ELENA grant. If for some reason or another, for example, because the project has delays, the minimum leverage ratio is not achieved, then the project sponsor will have to reimburse in part or full the CB ELENA grant. I just want to give you, to make it even more concrete, just 2 examples of the kind of projects that can benefit from the CB ELENA facility. The first one is a project by a municipality, in which case a municipality, for example, wants to extend a district heating and cooling network. And it can request a CB ELENA grant to fund the external consultancy services, which it requires to prepare all the procurement sides, so contractual arrangements and tendering procedure. So that's typically one example of the kind of projects that a CB ELENA grant could be used for. Another project is, for example, you could have a regional authority which is in charge of energy efficiency, and it wants to upgrade public transport infrastructure at local level, for example, by setting up buses or trams. And it could request a CB ELENA support or grant to fund the in-house capacity building, which means to fund additional staff which it would need to carry out the feasibility study and operate the project implementation unit throughout the life cycle of the project. So again, here you can see from the wide variety of services that can be implemented or that can be funded thanks to CB ELENA grant, whether it's external consultancy services or in-house capacity building. And also the type of expenditures that can be financed are pretty varied, and they can range from throughout the life cycle of the project, from the feasibility to the implementation. I'll finish off this presentation, I hope I wasn't too long, with the application process. The application process is pretty straightforward. The idea is to provide to the relevant CB country manager or the CB ELENA Secretariat a description of the project sponsor, so who would benefit from the technical assistance, to make sure that the project sponsor is eligible to this CB ELENA grant. So in this case, the idea is to show that the project sponsor is a public authority or a public body. You also need, obviously, to provide a description of the project itself, again, to show that it is eligible to a CB ELENA grant. So in this case, you would have to detail exactly what the project consists in, what's the duration for the implementation, how is it financed, what is the arrangements for the implementation, is there PIU set up, what is the procurement, et cetera, what type of, how will it contribute to energy savings or renewable energy production. Finally, the third part of the application is what kind of technical assistance is needed. Obviously, again, that's to make sure that it is eligible to CB ELENA grants. And again, you would need to describe in detail the kind of technical assistance needed, whether it's to fund external consultancy services or internal additional staff, whether it's to fund a procurement part or the business plan or energy audits. You would have to describe exactly how the technical assistance will consist of, what is needed, and obviously also include how the 10% that will not be covered by the CB ELENA will be financed. So this information can be provided either to me, basically, the CB ELENA Secretariat, or to the CB country manager. CB has a number of country managers which are in charge of one or several countries each, for which they act as a contact person. So they go into the country and meet public authorities to discuss their financing needs. So you can also contact the CB country managers. The details, contact details of the relevant country manager, so obviously the country manager for the country in which you're located, are available on the CB website. Then once we get this information, there's an assessment process, which should take around 4 months. It's done as a first step by CB, so we will look at the grant request, all the information that you have provided, to make sure that basically it is eligible to a CB ELENA grant. And we will, in particular, check whether the project is bankable. What we mean by bankable is whether the project is eligible to a CB loan. Now, that's an important thing. You do not have, obviously a CB ELENA grant can be provided alongside a CB ELENA loan, but that's not compulsory. So you can request a CB ELENA grant without requesting a CB ELENA loan. But even if you do so, we will check that the project is bankable, which means that we would be ready to finance through a loan the project, even if you do not request a loan. The reason behind this is that the Commission wants to make sure that the grants provided by CB ELENA are provided to projects that are sustainable, both from a technical point of view and from a financial point of view. And by asking us to conduct this assessment and to make sure that the projects are bankable, meaning that we would be ready to finance them, it's an assurance for them that the projects are sustainable. Finally, once we're satisfied, once CB is satisfied with the application, which is basically a 10-pager document, we transmit it to the Commission, which has around 20 days to assess the grant request, who can also ask for additional information, and who must approve all grant requests. So in the end, all grant requests are approved by the Commission. Once that is done, hopefully satisfactorily, we will sign a contribution agreement with the beneficiary of the grant request, with the beneficiary of the grant, and the contribution agreement details how the grant will be provided, so either as funds or directly in-kind technical assistance, and also the kind of reporting that is that will be put in place. So all the how the technical assistance will be structured and the reporting requirements, and obviously other issues. That's it. Thank you for your attention. I hope I wasn't too long. If you have any questions and you need for additional information, please let me know. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, for this very interesting and concise presentation. What we will do now, we will spend some time for the question and answers. I see that there are quite a few already questions typed in the chat box. So what I will do is I will start from the top and read a question out, and then Sebastian will directly answer this question. At the end of this first round, if there are more questions to be asked, we can give you a few moments to reflect and type in the chat box. Just for information, the Covenant of Mayors office has received a couple of questions already, so I'll ask these at the end. So I will start right now with the first question, and this came from Notia, and she asks, does the ELENA-CEB fund public lighting?
Yes, I think that's possible as part of, for example, an urban renewable project. What you should understand is that there is no, and maybe I'll take this opportunity to talk about something I didn't discuss in the presentation, is that there is no minimum amount for the, or maximum amount for the grant request. But since we have 5 million euros, we will usually, I don't think, for example, we would give more than 1 million euros to one grant beneficiary. And obviously, we're not going to go into very small amounts. Just like there is no limit, whether it's a cap or a ceiling for the type of projects that we're going to finance, the type of projects that can benefit from a CB ELENA grant. But as I said, a project needs to be considered bankable by CB, and we usually finance projects that, we have a wide range of projects in terms of amount that we can finance. We can finance smaller projects in Central, South, and Eastern Europe because obviously we understand that the needs are, or the institutional capacity to implement project is smaller in Central, South, and Eastern Europe. So the projects that we can finance there are much smaller. They can be, for example, 15, 20 million euros. But in Western Europe, the type of projects that we finance are usually bigger than that. So when we assess a project, a grant request, we will also look at the type of, the amount of the projects that is presented. So maybe it would, if you have a project that is not big in Western Europe, it might be interesting if it's possible to join with other public authorities which have the same type of project to present a sort of joint application. So to answer your question, I'm sorry if I made this digression, but yes, I think the public lighting would be fundable, eligible. Although, as always, in the end, it's the Commission who has the last word on this. So.
Great. Thanks a lot for that question. We move now to the second question, and it comes from Lubrito. Please give us some more details about staff being hired by the beneficiary.
Yes, absolutely. Again, the conditions are pretty flexible here. Obviously, the staff has to be, as I mentioned, hired. You cannot fund existing staff. It has to be hired for the project and not for something else. But apart from that, and it can also be, the funds can also be used to finance training of the staff. But apart from that, there aren't any restrictions. I just add that eligible staff costs correspond to actual salaries plus social security charges and other remuneration-related costs. Eligible costs can include value-added tax, but this is more in the case of external consultancy services.
Great, thank you. We move along now to our next question from Boris Fornoville. How do we know who our CEB country manager is? Well, I think this was already answered by you, saying that you have the details on the website. But what we can do as the Covenant of Mayors is we can send this link along with the PowerPoint presentation to everyone, just to make sure that it's really clear for everyone.
Absolutely.
So then.
Yep. In any case,
so then we can move.
Just to add, thank you for this. In any case, you can always contact me as a first contact, and then I could direct you, if needed, to the relevant country manager. So please don't hesitate to shoot me an email.
Okay, good. So be prepared to receive quite a few emails. We move on to our next question. This comes from Paola Ginarelli from the Provincia della Spezia. She's asking if there is an expected...
Yes. I've already discussed this. As I mentioned, there is no set minimum or maximum amount for a project. Obviously, the 20 leverage ratio between the technical assistance and the project has to be achieved. So that needs to be taken into account when presenting the project and the grant request. But as I mentioned, a project needs to be considered eligible by CEB, bankable by CEB to receive a CEB ELENA grant. So I would invite you to go on the CEB website to see the kind of projects, for example, in the annual report, the kind of projects that receive loan from CEB, to give you an idea of the amount of the projects that we finance. As I mentioned, these amounts can be quite small in Central, South, and Eastern Europe, because we understand that the institutional capacity is limited there, but they're bigger in Western Europe. But again, we're flexible on this.
Great, thank you for this. We have a question from E. Minardo. He's asking if it's possible to see some documentation or any examples where projects have already
You can find documentation on the CB ELENA facility on the CB website, whose address is actually on this side. It's www.coebank.org. Here you can find you can download a prospectus or brochure on the CB ELENA facility, which is a 4-pager document which gives you an overview of the CB ELENA facility. And you can also download a 10-page document which lists all the frequently asked questions and provides answers to these frequently asked questions. So with that, I think that covers most of the issues that can be raised on CB ELENA. But if you don't have the answer to your question, again, please feel free to send me an email and I'll try to answer it as best as possible. In terms of documents that are submitted by other for other grant requests, I don't think that we'll make these public. But you can also find on the CB website a pre-request form, which is the first step towards making a grant request, which is a form that you need to fill out with basically the information that I've just mentioned. So details on the project sponsor, the project itself, and the technical assistance. So that gives you an idea of the type of information that you will need to provide as a first step for this application process.
Great, thanks a lot. We have a question now coming from Vassilios Chrysafidis. He is asking Sebastian, how much of this 5 million budget is currently available? So to speak, have there already been projects funding?
Very good question, thank you. Well, as a matter of fact, the 5 million euros are still available because no projects have been, or no grant requests have been approved yet. Basically, we are currently ramping up the marketing phase for this CB ELENA facility. So all the funds are still available, which is quite a sizable amount. I mean, 5 million, if you consider technical assistance, you can do quite a lot.
Great. That's encouraging then for us at the moment, and hopefully this will allow the covenant signatories to think a bit about whether they could be involved in these projects. Let me take a few more questions. I'm just scrolling down. Yeah, we have another question from Diego Alcazar from San Juan, and he's asking about the eligibility investment regarding social housing. And in this case, does the owner of the social housing have to be the municipality, or whether it could be a private person?
The contribution agreement that we've signed with the Commission says that the grants must be provided to public authorities or public bodies. So at least normally, the owner must be the municipality. The project sponsor must be the municipality. The fact is that in some countries, a lot of the social housing, and I'm thinking about some Eastern Europe countries, a lot of the social housing has been privatized and is now owned by a private person, usually within a housing association. So in principle, I would have to answer that the owner must be the municipality, but it remains to be seen whether the Commission might, and this is a very hypothetical might be flexible in this issue. We'd have to see this with the Commission. So in this case, you would have to, if you're interested in this, you would have to sort of make a pre-grant request that we could check with the Commission.
Okay, great, thank you. Now just a few questions that we have gathered during the presentation and prior to this presentation. Regarding the possibility to submit a joint proposal from small neighboring municipalities, could you elaborate a bit more on the process of this and how you, as the CEB, see this? And for example, would it be possible that a province would coordinate?
Yes, so we're open to as I mentioned, the possibility of having joint proposals. And the process, I think, would be pretty similar. There would need to be just one grant request, which would present the project's sponsor or sponsors, and the project itself and the technical assistance required. But it does raise an issue, which is who in the end is accountable. What we want to avoid is a situation where we provide the technical assistance and the project does not get done for some reason or another, but the the beneficiary of the technical assistance is uh, not accountable because it's different from the project sponsor. So we would have to see to examine in detail how the project is structured, obviously in cooperation with the beneficiary or the overall project sponsor, as you mentioned, could be a regional authority, to see how we can structure this project to make sure that the, the beneficiary of the technical assistance are also responsible for the implementation of the project, so that in the end, the 20 leverage ratio is achieved.
Great, thanks for this. Actually, leading on from this answer, I see that we had a follow-up question. So Peter Daunt.
Um, Again, in principle, it's possible. Obviously, the projects would have to be located in countries that are eligible to a CB ELENA grants. As I mentioned, there are 30 of those. So in principle, it's possible. Again, the devil is in the details, and we would have to examine very closely how the project is structured, basically for the same reason that I've just presented.
Great, thank you for that. Maybe we have time still for a couple of more questions. In your presentation and in the documents, the background papers for this webinar, the definition of a disadvantaged region or population came up. What is the criteria, or how would you?
Yes. So as I mentioned, the reason for this criteria is that a project has to be considered bankable by CB, so eligible to a CB ELENA grant, and we provide funding for projects that target either disadvantaged regions or disadvantaged populations. In practice, we usually don't have a set criteria in how we define this, but I would refer you to our CB loan policy, which is again available on the CB website, and which defines more in detail the kind of projects that we can finance through loans, which are in a way the kind of projects that we could finance through grants with the CB ELENA. So to sum it up, no, we are pretty flexible on this, but obviously a project has to have a social content. Otherwise, it's not the kind of project that we finance. So, for example, it would be very difficult for us to finance a project in a neighborhood that is very wealthy, just to give a very simple example, or for the renovation of housing where the residents are not low-income persons. That's typically the projects that we cannot finance either through loans or with the CB ELENA grant. But criteria are pretty flexible, but I would refer you to our loan policy, which is available on our website, to know more about the kind of projects that we finance.
Good, thank you. We have another question from Emin Gardo, and he's asking what are the reasons, if there are any, that could postpone the deadline which you set to 3 years?
Frankly speaking, I don't see any reasons that could postpone the deadline. I mean, the technical assistance has to be provided. I mean, if I understand your question right, the technical assistance has to be provided within 3 years. And that's also the period that is used for the calculation of the leverage ratio. And I don't think neither us nor the Commission would look very favorably at extending that deadline. Obviously, and all the more so since 3 years for the provision of technical assistance it gives you quite a lot of time to at least prepare and carry out the first phase of a project. Obviously, this requires that when you come to us with a grant proposal or a grant request, you already have identified the project and done all the pre-feasibility work, which is what I was mentioning earlier. CB ELENA cannot be used for the pre-feasibility. It can also only be used for the feasibility work and the implementation.
Okay, cheers. I think we'll have time for maximum 3 more questions. I see already that there are 2 in the chat box, so we can take 1 more after this, and then we'll have to start concluding the webinar. We have a question from Oleg Piotr from Chisanu City Hall, and he's asking the very simple question, the deadline for the CEB ELENA facility project submissions.
December. It's the end of the year 2014, so you still have some time to present your grant request.
Okay, good. I think we'll make that clear when we send out the information after this webinar. Another question from the chat box I see is Diego Alcazar is asking, is it eligible, the investments in studies that improve the mobility in an area to improve the interoperability of transport and propose recommendations to transport operations?
If
it's quite
I
a detailed
understand
question.
your question correctly, and I hope I do, you're asking whether a study like this would be eligible. The Grant ELENA facility can be used to fund services that lead to a project. And again, there's this 20 leverage ratio. So if it's a study that is just a study and provides recommendation, it falls more into the pre-feasibility study type, and thus it would not be eligible to a CB ELENA grant request. So it's all a question of whether the consultancy services that you will finance or the type of expenditures that you will finance actually lead or are part of a project. If that is the case, yes, it's possible because you're at the feasibility status or stage. If you're looking at something that is very upstream from a project, it cannot be, it will not be eligible. But
okay, thank you for this clarification.
in terms of sector,
But
yes, the possibility to, you're talking here about mobility, and local transport projects are eligible to a CEB ELENA grant. So if you want to improve the energy efficiency of local transport, for example, by setting up a tram line or something like that, that's typically the kind of project that is eligible to a CEB ELENA grant.
good. Thanks for this. I think we can pretty much stop here and start to wrap up things. For the conclusion, I would like, Sebastian, for you to give us here the covenant signatories and supporters.
Keep it simple. I think the best thing to do is to get in contact with us, either the country manager or myself, to discuss at a first stage the kind of projects that you have, the kind of grant requests that you envisage, the kind of technical assistance that you need, and from here we can see whether it's eligible, and then go on to preparing a grant, filling out a grant request form. And here we'll be happy to help you as much as possible. But so I would say keep it flexible, and don't waste time preparing a whole grant request if you're not sure that it's eligible. Get in touch with us and we'll see from there.
Great, thanks for this. On that note, I think we can conclude this morning's webinar. I'd like to thank again Sebastian for the time, for the very clear presentation, and of course the question and answers that we had with you this morning. I would like to thank also the participants who attended the webinar. I hope that the sound quality was enough for you. From our side, from the Covenant office, what our next steps will be, we'll provide the presentation of Sebastian, an FAQ, so the frequently asked questions document, and our background paper on CEB ELENA onto our extranet in the coming week or so. And we'll also